Um, why do so many people fail to land their first cloud computing job, even after, like, memorizing the entire AWS textbook?
Yeah, that is a huge problem.
Right. I mean, you see it all the time on message boards and industry forums. Someone spends months grinding through the material, they learn all the acronyms, they pass the foundational test, and then they hit an absolute brick wall in the job market.
Oh, yeah.
They
Completely.
send out, 200 resumes and hear absolutely nothing back. It's a brutal reality for anyone trying to pivot into tech.
Well, the failure usually isn't a lack of technical knowledge. The failure happens because people treat breaking into the cloud computing industry like a standardized test in high school.
Oh, interesting. Like just checking boxes.
Exactly. They assume the system is perfectly meritocratic and entirely predictable. Like you read the syllabus, you take the test, you get handed a job. But the tech industry operates on an entirely different set of, well, of unwritten, highly chaotic rules.
Which is exactly why we're here. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are focusing on you, the listener, and your navigation through those unwritten rules. And we have a fascinating artifact on the table today to help us do exactly that.
We really do.
It's a strategic blueprint floating around AWS circles, simply titled Text Calais, which translates to pasted text, like a snippet of code or a highly refined playbook passed between engineers.
Yeah, and it's authored by two figures, Nat, who our sources describe as this curious high-level synthesizer, and Leo, who is a classic detail-oriented deep diver.
A pretty great combo for a project like this.
Oh, absolutely. Together, they haven't just created a list of things to study. They've architected a comprehensive 6-month survival guide for transitioning from absolute zero to securing a first role in cloud computing.
So the mission of our deep dive today is to unpack this blueprint. Why does this document focus so intensely on a 6-month AWS journey? And what can you, the listener, learn from the highly specific trajectory it charts out from zero to a first cloud job? Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, right off the bat, the approach Nat and Leo take immediately subverts expectations.
How so?
Because when most of us look for guidance on a major career pivot, we instinctively seek out true stories, right? We want to read the blog post of the guy who was like a barista in January and a DevOps engineer by July.
Right, we want the inspiring human element.
Exactly. But Text Calais refuses to give us a real person. Instead, it explicitly frames its entire 6-month curriculum around a completely fictional candidate.
I have to admit, that structural choice felt so counterintuitive to me at first.
Really? Why is that?
Well, a fictional success story sounds almost like a sterilized corporate marketing campaign. I mean, if someone is going to commit 6 months of their life to studying complex infrastructure, wouldn't a real gritty case study be far more motivating?
That makes sense.
Because a fictional character doesn't actually bleed or sweat or, cry over failing a practice exam. Is this like building a composite sketch of the perfect suspect, but instead it's the perfect success story? Does a fictional candidate make it easier for anyone to project themselves into that 6 months timeline?
That's a really good analogy. And what's fascinating here is the deliberate stripping away of survivorship bias.
Okay, survivorship bias. Unpack that for me.
Think about those real success stories you just mentioned. They are almost always polluted by invisible confounding variables. The barista who became a DevOps engineer,
Yeah.
they might have casually left out the fact that they took 3 years of computer science a decade ago.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Or that their college roommate happens to be a hiring manager at a massive tech firm who pulled their resume out of the rejection pile.
Right, the invisible advantages. When you try to replicate a real person's success step by step, you often fail because you don't share their unique, unstated circumstances.
Precisely. Nat and Leo recognize that. So by engineering a fictional candidate and mandating an inspirational but realistic tone, they distill the career transition down to pure, replicable mechanics.
They strip away the biographical noise.
Exactly. The fictional candidate operates as a universal avatar. It forces the learner to focus entirely on the execution of the process rather than getting distracted comparing their own background to someone else's.
That reframes the 6-month timeline completely, doesn't it? It's not just some arbitrary deadline pulled out of thin air to sound impressive.
No, not at all.
It's a mechanical constraint. 6 months is enough time to absorb highly technical concepts, but tight enough to prevent the dreaded tutorial hell.
Oh, tutorial hell is the worst.
Right. Where a learner just watches instructional videos for 2 years without ever actually taking the exam.
Yeah. Which brings us to the first major technical hurdle this fictional candidate faces in the blueprint: the certification phase, specifically studying for and passing the CLF-CO2.
And for those who might be new to the AWS ecosystem, CLF-C02 is the exam code for the AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner. It is the entry-level certification.
Right.
It doesn't test your ability to write complex code.
Right.
It tests your foundational literacy of the cloud. Like, do you know the difference between infrastructure as a service and platform as a service? Do you understand the shared responsibility model regarding security?
It's essentially the vocabulary test of the cloud computing world. But notice how Nat and Leo instruct the learner to approach it.
Yeah, it's very specific.
The document doesn't just say, pass the CLF-CO2. It heavily emphasizes documenting how they studied and, critically, what surprised them on the exam.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Why would there be surprises?
Well,
Because if the CLF-CO2 is a standardized, globally recognized certification, a comprehensive study guide should cover every single concept, right?
you'd think so.
If you read the official AWS documentation, the exam should theoretically just be the documentation presented on a screen. If you know the definitions, you shouldn't be surprised. I mean, it's the difference between memorizing a city's map and actually trying to navigate its rush hour traffic. The map doesn't prepare you for the detours.
That is a perfect way to describe it. And that assumption that the map is the territory is exactly why so many people fail on their first attempt.
Because they just memorize the map.
Right. Theoretical study in a controlled environment is never a one-to-one match with the actual AWS testing experience. The exams are notorious for their distractors and scenario-based phrasing.
Let's break down those mechanics. Because a distractor isn't just a wrong answer, is it?
No, it's not.
It's an answer that looks technologically correct, but is wrong for the specific business use case presented in the question.
Exactly. Take an introductory concept like Amazon EC2, which is basically renting a virtual computer in the cloud. A basic study guide will teach you what EC2 stands for and its core function. But the exam won't ask for a definition. The exam will give you a scenario. It'll say, a company needs to run a batch processing job that can be interrupted at any time without data loss, and they need to minimize costs to the absolute lowest tier.
Ah, so the theoretical student looks for EC2 in the answers, but the exam gives you 4 different types of EC2 purchasing options.
Right.
And if you haven't studied contextually, you'll be completely paralyzed by the options.
Exactly. You might select on-demand instances, which is technically a valid way to run the job, but it's the wrong answer.
Because the scenario specified the workload could be interrupted and needed the lowest possible cost.
Which requires spot instances. So the surprises Nat and Leo highlight aren't unfair trick questions. They are tests of applied context. Normalizing these surprises teaches the fictional candidate, and by extension, the listener to study for adaptability, not just rote memorization.
And that adaptability is crucial because it mirrors the actual day-to-day reality of working in cloud infrastructure.
Oh, 100%.
You rarely encounter perfectly sterile textbook scenarios in a production environment. You deal with legacy code, sudden outages, and rigid budget constraints. The exam surprises are the learner's first exposure to the friction of the real world.
And that friction is incredibly valuable currency when it comes time to actually look for a job.
Which is the immediate next phase in the Tech Scholar blueprint.
Right. There is no pause for celebration after passing the CLF-CO2. The document pivots aggressively to monetization.
The catalyst phase. This is where the blueprint addresses that brick wall we talked about at the beginning of the deep dive.
Yes, the resume black hole.
Exactly. The candidate has the certification. Now they have to leverage it in job applications to land that elusive first cloud role. So what does this all mean mechanically? Because let's be real, a digital badge on a LinkedIn profile doesn't automatically generate job offers.
It definitely doesn't.
I look at it like the CLF-C02 certification is a backstage pass. It gets you past security, but you still have to know how to talk to the band once you're inside. How did the candidate use the cert in applications, rather than just passively listing it on their resume?
Well, it requires an understanding of how modern hiring actually functions. We have to look at the applicant tracking systems, the ATS.
The bots.
Yeah, these are the automated HR software platforms that ingest resumes and filter out like 90% of them before a human being ever sees them.
Wow. 90%.
Yeah. So the CLF-CO2 certification acts as a mechanical bypass for those filters. If a hiring manager sets the ATS to require baseline cloud literacy and your resume lacks the string AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner, The software automatically dumps your application into the void.
Regardless of how smart or capable you might be.
Exactly. The certification gets you past the algorithmic gatekeeper. It puts your resume on a human recruiter's desk. But once you're sitting in the interview chair, simply pointing to the certificate does absolutely nothing.
Right, because everyone else in that chair also has the certificate.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Nat and Leo's framework views the certification not as the final product, but merely as the entry ticket to the conversation.
Because you have to overcome the classic cold start problem of the tech industry. You need experience to get the job, but you need the job to get experience.
Right. It's a catch-22.
If you are transitioning from an entirely different field, you don't have previous cloud projects to discuss. So the hiring manager is sitting across from you wondering, can this person actually handle the cognitive load of a complex technical environment? Or did they just memorize flashcards for a week?
And this is where the documentation of the 6-month journey becomes the candidate's greatest asset. The text call-a blueprint instructs the candidate to actively use the certification process in the application.
Like turning the study process into a story.
Yes, you don't just say, I passed the CLFC 02, you articulate the rigorous methodology you use to master the material.
You talk about the surprises.
Exactly. You tell the hiring manager, when I first encountered the intricacies of IAM policies, I struggled. The study materials made it seem straightforward, but the practice scenarios consistently tripped me up.
But here's the specific, structured approach I developed to isolate my knowledge gaps, adapt to the complexity, and ultimately master the concept to pass the exam.
Yes. That narrative demonstrates a highly valuable behavioral trait to a potential employer. You are proving your capacity for autonomous problem solving.
Which is huge.
It is. In a rapidly evolving field like cloud computing, a manager doesn't necessarily need you to know everything on day one. They need absolute certainty that when you encounter an undocumented error in the system, you won't freeze up and require constant hand-holding.
So the certification proves you have the baseline vocabulary, but the articulation of the 6-month struggle proves you have the required engineering mindset.
Exactly. That act of framing is what transforms the fictional candidate from a passive collector of credentials into a compelling hire. And according to the blueprint, it works.
The candidate lands their first cloud job. They have accomplished the core mission in the allotted 6 months.
And most instructional frameworks would roll the credits right there, right? Landing the job is the natural narrative conclusion.
The happy ending.
But the text call-a document refuses to stop. It pushes the fictional candidate immediately into the next phase of development.
And the pace is just relentless. I mean, the candidate literally just signed their offer letter, their foot is barely in the door, and the blueprint mandates they are already studying for the next certification, the SAA CIS 03.
Yeah, the AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate. And this isn't just another vocabulary test. This represents a profound technical and conceptual leap in the cloud computing ecosystem.
Let's define that leap for the listener. Because the Cloud Practitioner exam, the CLFC 02, teaches you that a service like Amazon S3 exists.
Right.
It teaches you that S3 is object storage used to hold data, like images or backups.
But the Solutions Architect exam, the SAA CO3, demands you know how to architect that storage into a highly available, fault-tolerant, and cost-optimized system.
That's a huge step up.
It really is. It requires you to know how to set up lifecycle policies so that data automatically transitions from standard storage to deeply archived, low-cost storage like S3 Glacier after 30 days, which saves a massive enterprise like 80% on their monthly bill.
It's the difference between knowing the names of the tools in the toolbox and knowing how to use those tools to build a structurally sound bridge that won't collapse under rush hour traffic.
Beautifully said.
It's moving from basic literacy to actual system design.
And this raises an important question about the fundamental culture of the tech industry. Why mandate this immediate escalation in a blueprint designed for beginners?
Yeah, why not let them rest for a minute?
By placing the SAA C03 as the final horizon point, Nat and Leo are injecting a heavy dose of reality into the document. They are establishing that in cloud computing, resting on your laurels is a fatal career mistake.
Because the technology depreciates too quickly. AWS releases thousands of new features, updates, and entirely new services every single year.
Thousands.
So the knowledge you used to pass the CLF CO2 6 months ago is already slowly becoming obsolete. If you stop learning the day you get hired, your value as an employee begins to actively decline.
Exactly. The SAACO3 acts as proof of continuous scaling. It demonstrates that the 6-month journey wasn't a one-time sprint to get a paycheck. It was the establishment of a permanent operating rhythm.
It sets the cadence for your entire career.
Right. The fictional candidate is inspirational because they maintain the hunger to keep climbing, recognizing that the first job is merely the baseline, not the summit.
When you look at the entirety of the text Kale artifact, the brilliance of Nat and Leo's high-level synthesis and detail-oriented deep diving really comes into focus. They haven't just provided a syllabus.
No, not at all.
They've provided a comprehensive psychological and mechanical architecture for a career pivot.
They teach you to use a fictional avatar to strip away your own excuses and confounding variables. They teach you to anticipate and embrace the contextual surprises of the exams.
They show you how to leverage an automated HR filter bypass into a compelling behavioral interview.
And they wire you to immediately look to the next technical horizon.
And the mechanics of this 6-month AWS journey apply far beyond cloud computing. They apply to almost any complex domain you want to enter. You have to reflect on the infrastructure of your own goals. What is the foundational vocabulary test in your chosen industry? How are you planning to articulate the struggle of your learning process to prove your adaptability to a hiring manager?
And critically, what is your version of the SAA COO3? What is the architectural leap that will prevent your newly acquired skills from depreciating the moment you achieve your first milestone?
Those are the mechanical questions that separate the people who successfully pivot from the people who send out 200 resumes and hear nothing back. And that brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. A concept for you to mull over as you plot out your next career move or major learning endeavor.
Oh, I'm intrigued. The floor is yours.
Well, the entire efficacy of Nat and Leo's blueprint relies on that fictional candidate, right? By inventing a persona, they mapped out the pure, unadulterated mechanics of success without the noise of human self-doubt. So what if you applied that same exercise to yourself?
Wait, really? Like writing your own story?
Yeah. What if the ultimate life hack isn't writing a standard list of resolutions, but actually writing a highly detailed, deeply specific, third-person fictionalized script of your own success over the next 6 months?
A script where you view your own actions with complete objectivity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you sit down today and invent an avatar, a slightly removed future version of you, who flawlessly executes the studying, navigates the inevitable exam surprises without panicking, actively sells the journey in the interview, and immediately starts eyeing the next horizon, does creating that fictional avatar actually hack your brain?
That is fascinating.
Does writing the script force you to stop worrying about your current lack of experience and start simply executing the raw mechanics of the blueprint?
It's an incredibly powerful exercise in reverse engineering your own potential, removing the emotion and leaving only the required actions.
It's something to ponder as you start drafting the blueprints for your next 6 months. The path forward is rarely a straight, predictable line. The tech industry is murky and chaotic, but if you focus on the mechanics rather than the myths, you can build a system that navigates the chaos. Keep executing. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.